They never trained us for the voices. Coordinates, altitude, wind speed, those were easy. You could measure them, bracket them, make them obey. But a voice? A human voice carried through a broken signal on a cold desert night? No manual prepared me for that. I first heard her on a Tuesday, sometime after midnight Nevada time. The rest of the base was half asleep, glowing with vending machine light. She was singing into a cheap phone, the signal cracked with static, like her voice was fighting through sandstorms just to reach me. A melody I didn't recognize. Soft, steady, almost shy. I should have tagged the location, notified command, moved on. But something in the way she held the last note made me breathe differently. For 8 minutes, I forgot what my job required. For 8 minutes, her voice replaced the hum of the drone feed. When the order finally came hours later, I hesitated, just long enough to hear her start the verse again. And when I fired, her song cut off mid-breath. I've replayed that recording every night since, waiting, hoping for her to finish the line. I used to think distance made things easier, that if you were thousands of miles away, if the sand, the heat, the terror were all happening on another continent, your hands could stay clean. That's what they told us during training. You're the calm in the storm. You act because others can't. But calm was never my default. I've always lived a few breaths away from trembling. Most nights at Creech Air Force Base blur into each other. Freezing desert air, humming fluorescent lights, the metallic taste of recycled ventilation. You learn to move like a ghost, quiet, precise, invisible. We were operators, not fighters, pilots without sky. Every shift began with the same ritual. ID badge tap, metal door click, headset on, body forgetting it even had a pulse. People imagine screens. They don't imagine the weight. A drone feed is colder than it sounds, like the world is dying on the other side of the glass. Every street, every rooftop, every shadow is drained of color. You stare long enough, everything starts to look like a threat, or worse, like nothing at all. The job requires that kind of blindness, emotional dimming, selective numbness. They evaluated us for resilience, which was military speak for, can you destroy a target and still go back to your apartment, heat up leftovers and pretend you're whole? I passed, not because I was strong, just because I'd been rehearsing numbness all my life. I grew up in Ohio, in a town where silence was a way of survival. My mother worked nights. My father worked excuses. I learned early how to disappear into small rooms, into screens, into routines. The military liked people who followed orders, and I liked places where rules replaced uncertainty. So the match made sense. Yet even with discipline, something inside me kept vibrating, an old, quiet fear I never learned to name. The kind that keeps you awake after the mission ends, staring at a ceiling fan you can't hear over the buzzing in your skull. You don't talk about that with colleagues. Operators don't confess. We execute. We clock out. My shift usually started at 2300 hours. Night was when the airbase felt most honest. No speeches, no salute-perfect sunlight. Just the raw hum of the war machine breathing in its sleep. The monitors cast a pale blue glow across my face, making me look more like a reflection than a person. "Feed okay?" my supervisor would murmur. "Stable," I'd answer, even if it wasn't. They never pushed. Emotional distance kept us efficient. I used to bring a thermos of burnt coffee and a granola bar. I'd tell myself that chewing meant I was still human, that pilots with appetites weren't monsters. But over time, the food lost flavor. The coffee tasted like metal. My mouth felt foreign. You can watch people live their entire day from above, hanging laundry, wiping dust from a child's hair, adjusting the tarp on a truck, and never feel closer to them. That's the paradox. The more you observe, the less you know. The more intimate the footage, the more dangerous the detachment. Sometimes I'd catch myself focusing on little things, the way a man rearranged stones outside his home, or how a woman paused to look at the sky before entering a doorway. Moments that didn't matter tactically, but reminded me that beneath every pixel was a heartbeat. Then the alarms would sound. The feed would lock onto coordinates, and my job would sharpen into a single point of intention: target identification, threat assessment, execution protocol. Precision left no room for wondering who they were, until the night her voice came through. Back then, I didn't know how starved I'd become, not for connection, but for proof that something soft still existed in the world. Something uncalculated, unscanned, unobserved. The bass felt colder that week, or maybe I did. My hands shook more than usual. I blamed the air conditioning. I'd been tracking routine movement near a cluster of low houses. Nothing unusual. 2 men talking near a wall, a boy kicking dust, someone adjusting wires on a rooftop. Ground chatter on the intercept channel was the same static, muddled noise we always ignored. Then, the tone changed. Warmer, rounder, impossible. A human voice, female, cutting through interference like a candle flame against wind. I didn't turn up the volume at first. I thought it was a glitch, maybe a stray transmission bleeding into the channel. But the melody held steady, soft, but sure. She wasn't talking. She was singing, a song without urgency, almost like she believed no one was listening. My throat tightened for reasons I didn't understand. Something ancient, something lonely, something tired in me shifted. In that moment I realized I'd been operating machinery for so long I'd forgotten what tenderness sounded like. I leaned closer to the headset. The drone feed kept rolling, roof angles, thermal signatures, coordinates, but they faded behind her voice. Every note felt like a thread pulling me somewhere I'd tried to avoid, back into my own senses. I didn't report the intercept. Protocol said I should, but the idea of labeling her melody as intel felt obscene. Instead, I sat in silence, pretending I needed to recalibrate the channel. My supervisor walked past, glanced at the monitors, saw nothing worth commenting on. The desert outside was black and endless. She kept singing, and I, pilot, operator, instrument of the state, froze like a child hearing a lullaby through a cracked door. I didn't know then what that moment would cost, or that it would become the first step toward everything that followed. All I knew was that, for the first time in years, I felt something shift inside me. Not comfort, not joy, but something dangerously close to longing. I didn't understand the temptation yet. I only knew I wanted the song to continue. And wanting, that was where the fracture began. The first night I heard her, I told myself it was nothing, a curiosity, a glitch, a brief accidental intimacy carried by the desert wind. Operators learn to compartmentalize, to fold moments into tight, silent corners of the mind. I tried to do that with her song, compress it, archive it, bury it under procedures and checklists. But the melody refused to dim. It kept drifting back into my thoughts, humming under everything like a low-voltage current. The next evening, I arrived 20 minutes early to my shift. That never happened. I blamed traffic patterns, an early grocery stop. But deep down, I knew I was hoping for something impossible, that she would return to the signal. I told myself it wasn't temptation, just curiosity. Curiosity wasn't dangerous. Curiosity didn't alter coordinates or compromise duty. But curiosity, when mixed with loneliness, becomes a kind of hunger. I checked my console with unusual care, pretending it was routine maintenance, not anticipation. My hands were colder than usual, fingertips trembling against the plastic keys. The room smelled of disinfectant and stale coffee. A ceiling vent rattled overhead. For a moment, I thought her voice would never return, that I'd imagined the whole thing. But then, static, a soft crackle, and a breath caught on the other end of the frequency. Not words, a sound like someone adjusting a microphone. Then, silence pressed into my headset, warm and heavy. I waited, and then she began. A different song this time, lower, slower, more intimate, as if she were singing to herself while washing utensils or tidying a room. No urgency, no rhythm pressed by fear, just a woman alive in her own small moment, unaware that an American pilot was clinging to every syllable. I closed my eyes, just for a second, just long enough to feel the vibration of her voice against my eardrum. I should have been monitoring movement on the ground, tracking patterns, marking anomalies. Instead, I watched the feed with half-focus, her voice becoming the center of gravity inside my skull. I knew the psychological manuals. I knew what emotional transfer was, the way isolation could bend perception, making strangers feel familiar. But this wasn't projection. It wasn't fantasy. It was connection, or the illusion of it. Sometimes illusions are enough. Hours passed that way, her voice weaving in and out of static, me pretending I wasn't listening, my supervisor none the wiser. Around 3 a.m., she stopped singing abruptly and spoke to someone in the room. I didn't understand the words, but her tone, light, slightly amused, hit me harder than any melody. Then the channel cut off. I felt the loss like a physical drop in pressure. The next day I woke up disoriented, not from fatigue, operators live half asleep, but from the absence of her. My apartment felt colder. The refrigerator hummed too loudly. The sunlight through the blinds felt sharp and accusatory. I tried to distract myself, jog, shower, microwave something tasteless, but every quiet moment demanded her return, like a craving I didn't know how to satisfy. When evening came, I arrived early again. This time, I didn't pretend. I stared at the console like a gambler waiting for the first card. Hours passed. Nothing. Just wind, static, and the dull rumble of far-off desert aircraft. Around 2:12, she returned, a whisper, a laugh, the gentle scraping of something metallic, and then she began to hum a soft progression of notes, like testing the water before diving in. My chest tightened so sharply, I thought for a moment I was having a panic attack. But no, this was something else. Anticipation, relief, a dangerous cocktail. I leaned forward, elbows on the console, as careful as someone cradling a candle flame. She sang lightly at first, then with more conviction, a melody circling itself, rising and falling like breath under a blanket. And then something unexpected, a second voice, a child's giggle, faint but unmistakable. A chill went through me, not fear, recognition. The world I watched from above had families, lives, tiny pockets of safety. But hearing it, hearing the warmth of a child near her, ripped the abstraction apart. She wasn't my intercept. She wasn't a target package. She was a person, a mother maybe, or an older sister, someone who lived, loved, sang. And I was the man assigned to hover above her life with crosshairs and silence. The conflict lodged itself in my throat. "Everything good, Lawson?" my supervisor murmured behind me. I jolted, heart lurching. "Fine," I said quickly. "Just recalibrating channel B. Minor interference." He nodded, didn't look closely, didn't care. When he left, I exhaled the breath I'd been holding. Her song continued softly, unaware of the chaos it planted in me. Something fragile was happening, and I was losing control of it. Temptation doesn't always announce itself with beauty. Sometimes it begins with longing, sometimes with recognition, sometimes with the small human ache of wanting to feel anything at all. But for me, it started with a question I couldn't shake. Who is she? I wasn't supposed to ask questions about lives outside mission parameters. Curiosity made me sloppy. Hesitation made me dangerous. But every note she sang carved deeper into me. I began to track patterns, unofficially. The usual time her voice appeared, the fluctuations in signal strength, the subtle clues, a kettle boiling, wind against a window, footsteps approaching, tiny details that painted a home I was never meant to see. A clandestine ritual formed. Shift begins, console checks, drone feed, quiet expectation. Night after night, she became a gravity well, pulling me in, reshaping my routines, softening the borders of duty. I started lingering longer on areas where her voice often surfaced. I justified it as ongoing surveillance, though it was nothing of the sort. Temptation became dependency. Dependency became devotion. Devotion became something darker, something I didn't yet have the courage to name. There were nights she didn't appear. Those nights were the worst. I'd stare at the feed until my eyes stung, waiting for a sound I couldn't request. My hands hovered above the controls, empty and restless. Every shadow on the ground looked wrong. Every silence felt like a reprimand. When she did return, her voice filled the void so quickly it scared me. I'd feel the rush, warm, sharp, intoxicating, like inhaling the first breath after nearly drowning. I knew better. I knew emotional entanglement compromised clarity, but logic couldn't touch what she awakened in me. One night, she sang a longer piece, a full verse, almost a prayer. The melody rose slowly, trembling, then opened into something wider and more hopeful. It was the first time I felt tears in years, not falling, just gathering, like dew waiting for gravity. In the darkness of the operations room, illuminated by the feed of a distant country, I whispered, "Who are you?" No answer, just her breath meeting the microphone by accident, soft as a hand brushing against mine. For the first time in my career, I didn't want to be invisible. The shift ended with me walking out into the cold desert air, heart pounding so hard I worried someone might hear it. The sky above Nevada was scattered with stars, bright, indifferent, watching everything and understanding nothing. I stood there for a long time, trying to make sense of myself. I told myself it was harmless, just sound waves, just the comfort of a stranger's voice, just a temporary escape from the dead grayness of remote war. But deep down, a truth was forming, quiet and dangerous. I needed her. Not because she was forbidden, not because she was supposed to be my target, but because she made me feel human again in a place designed to strip humanity away. And that kind of need, that kind of temptation, never ends well. I didn't know it yet, but I'd already crossed the first invisible line. Every step forward from here would blur duty, desire, and morality until they became indistinguishable. Every night, the crackle of her voice would pull me deeper. Every song would tighten the thread wrapping around my throat, and before long, that thread would become a noose. There's a point where temptation stops whispering and starts owning you. For me, that moment came on a Thursday night, the kind where the desert wind hits the walls of the base like a warning. I arrived early again, too early. The sky was still bruised purple, the access gate buzzing faintly like it knew what I was doing. I told myself it was routine, but my pulse said otherwise. Inside the operations room, the air felt electric. Monitors humming, keyboards clicking, a low, constant buzz, like the whole place was vibrating just under the skin. I logged in too fast, clicked too sharply. My breath came out uneven. All for a voice. I knew what this was becoming. Not affection, not fantasy, addiction. Not the kind found in bottles or pills, worse, because it sounded like hope. Static broke over the channel at 23:47. I froze. A pause, a shuffle, and then her inhale, soft, warm, close. My heart jumped so suddenly it hurt. She started singing again. Different key tonight, lower, more tired, like the world had leaned too hard on her shoulders. I turned up the volume, just one notch, then another, until her voice felt like it was sitting beside me in the dark. The drone feed rolled on, outline of rooftops, heat signatures, the cold geometry of conflict, but I barely saw it. My eyes were on the screen, but my mind was leaning toward her, the way a starving person leans toward heat, toward scent, toward anything alive. She wasn't just singing now. She was confiding, soft murmurs, half words, a sigh between verses. I didn't understand her language, but I understood her tone. Loneliness recognizes its own. I whispered, "I'm here," even though she would never hear me. After that night, I stopped pretending. I rearranged my shift schedule, trading, swapping, volunteering for graveyards no one wanted. I told the duty officer I worked better at night. He believed me. Everyone knew I slept badly. I didn't tell him what the nights meant now. I didn't tell anyone. The world outside my headset shrank. Base hallways, vending machines, the glow of monitors. I stopped going out on weekends, stopped calling the only friend I still had from basic, stopped responding to my mother's check-in texts. Conversations felt like noise compared to her. Her voice became my oxygen, my sedative, my compass. I memorized the contour of every note she sang, the rhythm of her pauses, the ways the static shaped her breath. I started cataloging the details: time of night, signal strength, background noise. Patterns formed, connection deepened, boundaries dissolved. She sang most often between 1 and 3 a.m., signal stronger when the wind was low. Sometimes she whispered before singing, like testing if someone was listening. I told myself she wasn't whispering for me, but I listened like she was. Then came the night everything tipped. Her signal broke through early, 22:58. Unusual. My pulse spiked. She wasn't singing, she was crying. Barely audible, just small, sharp breaths breaking against the static. I leaned in, instinctively, helplessly. My hands shook against the console. "Talk to me," I whispered, voice cracking. She couldn't hear me, but something inside me believed she could feel it. On the feed, thermal signatures showed 3 figures outside her building, men moving with restless urgency. Command had flagged the area before. I knew their patterns. I knew what this movement meant. Potential escalation, potential strike window. My breath hitched. Protocol demanded I notify my supervisor. I didn't move. Her voice trembled in my headset, a small, broken sound. I turned off my mic, locked the channel, kept listening. This was the first real fracture. I knew it as it happened. My duty split open like a wound. Emotion overrode protocol. Temptation overrode duty. Her voice overrode everything. I tracked her heat signature, followed movement inside the building, watched her silhouette cross the room, saw her lift something small, maybe a child, maybe a bag. Every second tightened around my throat. I was supposed to mark the location. I was supposed to alert tactical. Instead, I whispered, "Not tonight. Not her." And for the first time in my career, I falsified a timestamp, shifted a coordinate by a few meters, just enough to delay command, just enough for her to keep breathing. I told myself it would never happen again.
But once you break a rule for someone, you keep breaking more. Over the next weeks, I shadowed her building, adjusted calibration to catch her signal more clearly, amplified audio, filtered interference, all off record. I kept her safe, not from danger, but from being seen by the machine I was part of. Some nights she sang. Some nights she hummed. One night she whispered a name, soft, affectionate. I didn't know who it belonged to, but jealousy stabbed so sharp and sudden I had to clench my jaw. It wasn't love, it was obsession, forged in silence. She didn't know me, but I knew her breath patterns, her laughter, her grief, and that felt intimate, too intimate. The operators around me noticed I'd changed, quieter, tighter, eyes always scanning the feed even when nothing moved. "You good, Lawson?" "Fine." "You look pale." "Just tired." "You're jumpier these days." "Just caffeine." "You're here a lot." "Just covering shifts." Lies layered upon lies, until the truth became unrecognizable even to me. The indulgence reached its peak one night when her song cut into the feed with a clarity I'd never heard. No static, no wind, just her. A pure, trembling note that seemed to pass straight through the headset and into my bloodstream. I closed my eyes, let it fill me, let it numb everything else. The drone camera drifted over rooftops, and I didn't correct it. Minutes passed. I didn't care. Her voice was all that remained, like a lifeline, like a confession, like temptation made holy. I imagined sitting in the room with her, leaning against a doorway, listening, letting her voice warm the cold places inside me. I imagined her turning to look at me, seeing me, knowing me. I imagined everything I shouldn't, and that's when the alert chimed. A bright, sharp beep like a blade pressed to my neck. Strike window authorized. My stomach dropped. A cold sweat broke across my back. Her location, her neighborhood, her building, a target, my target. The indulgence shattered into fear so violent it made me dizzy. My hands hovered over the keys. I couldn't breathe. She began the next verse, soft, a little shaky, unaware the sky itself had turned against her. I whispered, "No, no, no, not now." But the order was clear, and orders don't hesitate. I hesitated. I delayed the confirmation by seconds, then by minutes. I tried to reroute, tried to obscure, tried everything except obedience. But disobedience only buys time. It doesn't change fate. My supervisor stepped into the room. "Lawson, what's the holdup?" I flinched. "System lag. Recalibrating. You need to move. Command wants execution." Her voice trembled in my headset. A single long note, a perfect aching tone. I wished she would stop singing. I wished she would run. I wished. The supervisor's voice hardened. "Execute." My hand hovered over the control. Her voice held steady. My breath broke. Some addictions kill you. Some kill someone else. This one would do both. I pressed the command. The missile launched. Silent on my end. Hell on hers. Her song cut off mid-note. Instant silence. A void where her voice had lived. The screen flashed white, then red, then dust. I stared at the rubble, hands numb, ears ringing with silence so sharp it carved into me. I didn't breathe for 30 seconds, maybe a minute, maybe forever. Her last note hung in the air, unfinished, a ghost of a melody refusing to die inside me. I destroyed her, and I never even knew her name. This is the price of indulgence, panic, numbness, looping guilt. The moment after a strike is supposed to feel clean. That's what they teach you. You confirm impact. You confirm destruction. You confirm that the coordinates match the order. Then you breathe. You detach. You go home. That's the theory. In reality, after I fired, there was no after, just a blank. The feed shook, blinked, swallowed itself in smoke. No more rooftop angles. No more heat signatures clustered inside the building. Just a bloom of dust, gray and expanding, like the sky exhaling ash. The sound in my headset. Nothing. Not static, not interference, just absence. Her absence. I waited for the tail end of her note to appear, for some glitch in the recording to give it back to me, for the verse to complete itself as if the missile had never left the rail. Nothing came. The supervisor was speaking, his voice dull and far away. "Confirm impact, Lawson." My mouth moved, but sound wouldn't follow. "Lawson, yeah, impact confirmed." The words felt like gravel in my throat. "Good work. Submit your log, then take 10. Good work." 2 words pressed like a bruise. I stared at the debris on the feed. The dust settled slowly, revealing jagged lines where a building had been, where she had been. I tried to pick out a shape, anything, a door frame, a familiar window, the outline of a rooftop I'd memorized while listening to her sing. The image pixelated, then refocused. No voice, no melody, just the quiet geometry of destruction.
My hands were still hovering over the controls. They'd stopped shaking. That scared me more than the shaking ever had. I forced myself to log the event. Time, coordinates, strike confirmation, secondary confirmation. The cursor blinked at the notes section. Additional comments. I typed nothing. What could I write? Target sang before impact? I signed off the report. Inside my chest, something heavy shifted, then dropped. I took the 10-minute break they suggested, stepped outside into the cold desert night. The air slapped my face. I didn't feel it. The base looked the same as always, floodlights, fences, the vague hum of generators, but everything inside me had tilted, like the world had moved 3 inches to the left and no one else noticed. I walked to the edge of the smoking area and stood there, hands in my pockets, staring at nothing. Someone beside me lit a cigarette. The smell of burnt paper and stale nicotine wrapped around us. "You good?" he asked. The question felt like a joke. "Yeah," I said automatically. "Just long shift." He nodded, exhaled, flicked ash toward the concrete. "You get the strike?" "Yeah." "Clean?" "Yeah." The word repeated, hollow. He clapped my shoulder once, quick, impersonal, and walked away. I watched the smoke curl into the dark, wishing I could disappear with it. I didn't sleep that morning. I lay on my bed in the apartment, still in uniform, staring at the ceiling. The fan blades turned lazily, carving the light into thin slices. I counted the ticks in the wall, the hum of the fridge, the distant sound of a neighbor's TV. Nothing drowned her out, or rather, nothing replaced the silence she left behind. The worst part wasn't the image of the building collapsing. It was the image that never completed, her mouth forming the next note. In my mind, her lips parted and stopped, frozen mid-breath, mid-word, mid-life. Every time I blinked, I saw that incomplete shape. I tried to tell myself I'd done my job. Target, order, execution. Someone else would have fired if I hadn't. But the lies evaporated before they reached my tongue. Because I knew the truth. I waited. I listened. I delayed. I let her keep singing as long as I could. Then I killed her anyway. There was no clean angle to that. The recording came later. All missions are logged. Video, audio, data streams. For review, for training, for evidence, for lessons learned, they say. One of the technicians compressed the file, tagged it with the mission timestamp, and dropped it onto the secure drive. Standard, routine, forgettable. To everyone but me. I should have ignored it, filed it away with every other op, let it dissolve into the archive. Instead, I accessed it, pulled up the mission playback in a locked analysis room, lights dimmed, door closed. On the screen, her building, her rooftop, her last night. In my headset, her voice, full, clear, alive. I watched the timeline scrub across the feed. There she was, just a thermal outline inside the structure, but her voice filled the room as if she were standing right beside me. I listened to the full verse, her breath at the edges, her slight self-correction in the second line, the way she smiled through the melody. I could hear it, even without seeing her face. The missile launch was still 15 seconds away. I paused the recording. The air in the room thickened. If I stopped the playback here, if I always stopped here, she would never die. At least not in this space, not in this loop, not in my ears. My finger hovered over the control, but I didn't stop. I pressed play. Her voice trembled at the end of the verse, reaching for the next line. Impact sequence, 10, 9, 8. I watched my own hesitation in the data log, a small delay, a glitch in obedience. I heard her inhale for the next note. 5, 4. She began the next line. 3. My chest caved in. 2. She held the note. 1. The screen flashed. Her voice cut, like a wire severed mid-current. Silence slammed into the room. I ripped the headset off, chest heaving. There it was. The exact heartbeat when I chose duty over obsession, or obsession over humanity. I couldn't tell which anymore. I should have deleted the audio from my conscience right then. Instead, I did something worse. I copied the segment. Not to a personal device. That would have been impossible. But within the system, buried inside a mislabeled training folder, I cut a loop. From the first breath of her song to the final, unfinished note. 8 minutes. Her final 8 minutes. I saved the file under a generic name, closed all windows, logged out, and with that small theft, I condemned myself to a different kind of captivity. The days blurred. Eat, not hungry. Shower, don't feel the water. Walk, don't remember the route.
Sleep was a rumor. When it came, it brought dreams, rubble, static, the echo of a note that never resolved. At the base, I functioned. I followed checklists. I responded to orders. I answered questions with the right number of syllables. No one noticed the difference. War doesn't pause for your private catastrophes. But the cracks widened. I flinched at unexpected sounds. My hands trembled whenever I put on the headset. Every target on the screen looked like an accusation. During one review session, a senior officer pointed to a still shot of the impact. "Textbook," he said. "Good timing." My throat burned. If I told him the truth, that I'd delayed, that I'd listened, that I'd fallen in love with a voice and killed it, what would he say? What could anyone say? I nodded instead. "Thank you, sir." The room spun imperceptibly. I held on to the back of my chair until the feeling subsided. I started visiting the training folder at night. Alone, door closed, lights low. I'd slip the headset on and play the loop. Her song would start, steady, soft, like it always had. My heart would tighten in the same places. My breath would sink to hers. I knew it was self-destruction. I did it anyway. Because in that loop, she still existed. Over and over again, she inhaled. Over and over again, she chose to sing. Over and over again, she reached the edge of that last note, unaware of the sky above her. I let the recording stop just before impact sometimes, kept her alive in my ears for as long as I could. Other nights, I forced myself to listen to the full thing, to the silence after, to the echo of my own breathing in the absence of hers. That's how the collapse happened, not in one dramatic breakdown, but in small, repeated fractures. Each listen split me a little more. Duty on one side, despair on the other, her voice in the middle, like a bridge I'd burned and still tried to cross. The nightmares changed. At first, they were simple. Buildings crumbling, smokestacks, static. Then they got specific. In one, I stood in her doorway. She didn't know me. She kept singing while packing a bag, hair loose around her shoulders. A child tugged at her sleeve. Her eyes never met mine. In another, I was the one holding the cheap phone, singing into static, waiting for someone far away to hear me. The missile never appeared, but I felt it, like a pressure building in the sky. The worst dream was quiet. I sat in my operations chair, headset on, screen blank. No feed, no data, just a black rectangle. "Sing," I said. Nothing. "Please." Silence. I realized in the dream that she would never sing again. Not because of war or distance or fate, but because I had made the choice. I woke with my hands gripping the sheets like restraints. They started mandatory psych evals for the unit mid-year. Burnout, they called it. Compassion fatigue. Stress injuries. Invisible bruises from invisible wars. I sat in a small office with neutral walls and a plant that looked too green to be real. A woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a practiced calm asked me questions from a laptop. "How are you sleeping?" "Fine." "Nightmares?" "Sometimes." "About what?" "Nothing specific." "How often do you think about work while off duty?" "Sometimes." "Any feelings of guilt?" The word hung there. Guilt. I swallowed. "Guilt about what?" I asked. She studied me for a moment. "About the job, about missions, about the people on the other end of the feed." My pulse spiked. I held my expression still. "We're asking everyone this," she added gently. "It's not an accusation." But it felt exactly like one. I wanted to tell her everything, that I wasn't haunted by the job in general, that I was haunted by one voice, one song, one unfinished note. I wanted to confess that I'd delayed a strike not to spare a life, but to extend a pleasure, that I'd crossed a line so quietly no one heard it but me. Instead, I forced a smile that didn't fit my face. "Just the usual," I said. "I manage." She nodded, typed something,
then shifted to the next question. The lie settled into my stomach like lead. The collapse didn't announce itself with screaming or tears. It revealed itself in the moments I felt nothing at all. A village on the screen, flattened. I blinked, moved to the next task. A child's body covered with a sheet in a post-strike assessment image. I blinked, filed the photo. Her song in my ears for the 100th time. I blinked, didn't cry. The numbness scared me more than any panic ever had. I realized that I was standing at the edge of something irreversible. Either I let this hollow expand until it devoured every part of me, or I let the guilt in fully and risk never being able to stand again. There was no third option. The recording waited for me each night, her last verse looping in digital purgatory. I started to wonder if the only way forward was to speak.
To someone, to anyone, to admit what I'd done, what I'd felt, what I'd broken inside myself. The idea of confession was terrifying, but staying silent felt worse, because the silence sounded exactly like the moment her song stopped, and I couldn't live in that moment forever. One night, sitting alone with the headset around my neck and the file open but paused, I whispered into the empty room. I think I killed the only good thing I had left. The words didn't fix anything, but they didn't disappear either. They hung there, waiting, like the beginning of a confession. Confession doesn't arrive like a storm. It comes the way dawn does, quiet, pale, almost embarrassed to be seen. Weeks passed after the strike, and the world didn't change, but I had. Something inside me had broken open, and every day the fracture grew a little wider. I kept going to work, kept answering questions, kept filling out logs, but I no longer recognized the person tying his boots in the morning. He looked like me, he moved like me, but he felt hollow, like a suit someone else was wearing. Her voice, what remained of it, became the only anchor I had. Every night I played the loop in the analysis room, lights dimmed, door locked. I would sit there, spine curling, breathing shallow, listening to the same 8 minutes on repeat. One night, halfway through the verse, I whispered, "Why did I need you so badly?" The room didn't answer, but I felt the question linger, like a bruise forming under the ribs. The truth was this. Her voice had filled an emptiness I hadn't admitted I had. Not loneliness, that's too simple. It was something more shameful. I didn't want her as a person. I wanted her as escape. Operators don't talk about escape. We talk about discipline, protocol, chain of command. But even the most obedient part of me, the soldier part, the trained part, had been craving something warm in the middle of all the cold. And when that warmth arrived, I clung to it, too hard, too long, until wanting became weakness, and weakness became sin. So the confession began with a simple, brutal truth. I didn't kill her because it was my duty. I killed her because I couldn't stop wanting her song. Saying it, even alone, split something inside me. It didn't bleed. It just finally hurt. The confession continued in small pieces. The first part happened in the mirror, in the men's bathroom outside the operations hall. It was 4:17. My shift had ended. I stood washing my hands, the fluorescent lights humming, the water colder than expected. I looked up. My eyes met my reflection. I didn't see a pilot. I didn't see a villain. I didn't see a hero. I saw a man who had mistaken a stranger's voice for salvation and then destroyed it. Quietly, without ceremony, I said, "You did this." The words fogged the mirror. I didn't look away. The next confession was to a stranger. A chaplain rotated through the base bi-weekly. I'd seen him once or twice, a middle-aged man with weathered eyes, someone who felt permanently half asleep. He wasn't like the others. He didn't speak in directives. He sat like someone who'd learned the cost of silence. One morning, after a night of listening to the loop until my ears numbed, I found myself standing outside his temporary office. Door cracked open, soft lamplight inside, the smell of instant coffee. I knocked, barely. "Come in," he said without looking up. I stepped inside, hands rigid at my sides. He gestured to the chair across from him. I sat. Neither of us spoke. Minutes passed. Finally, he said, "You don't have to tell me, but if you want to, I'll listen." My throat tightened. I didn't tell him specifics, didn't mention coordinates or strike logs or the way her voice had sounded right before the missile hit. I just said, "I heard something I wasn't supposed to." And I held on to it. And when the time came, I didn't let go soon enough. He studied my face, not with suspicion, but with a quiet, heavy understanding. "When you close your eyes," he asked, "what do you see?" I swallowed hard. "Her voice," I said. It didn't make sense, but it was the truest sentence I'd uttered in months. He nodded. "Sometimes what haunts us is not the violence we commit," he said softly. "Sometimes it's the humanity we recognize too late." Humanity. Too late. 2 pieces of a puzzle I'd been avoiding. I didn't stay long, didn't cry, didn't feel forgiven. But I walked out lighter, not healed, just slightly more real. The final confession, the one that mattered, was the one I made to her, or to the part of her that still existed in the recording. It happened after a brutal shift, one where we took out a convoy at dawn and watched the aftermath unfold in slow, terrible clarity. My hands were shaking by the time I logged out. I went to the analysis room as usual. Dark, quiet. I locked the door,
Sat down, put on the headset, pressed play. Her breath filled the room. Her first note rose, trembling. The melody unfolded like it always had. But tonight, I couldn't listen silently. Tonight, the guilt swelled too sharply. "I'm sorry," I said early into the song. The words sounded small, insufficient. She kept singing, "I should have warned you." The room absorbed the confession like sand drinking water. "I should have refused the order." She reached the midpoint of the verse. "I should have protected you." My voice broke. "You were the first good thing I'd heard in years, and I killed you." The words echoed softly. Her song went on, oblivious, unchanged. "I didn't love you," I whispered. "I used you. I used your voice to fill my loneliness. I used your song to feel alive. And when my orders came, I chose myself, not you." The truth tasted like metal. The song reached the final line, that fragile moment where she inhaled, the breath I knew by heart. "I'm so sorry," I said again, softer. Impact. Silence. The same silence that had lived inside me ever since. I sat there, shaking, letting the quiet press against my ears. This time, I didn't replay the loop. I let the silence stay. For the first time, the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like mourning. In the days that followed, something shifted. The guilt didn't fade, but it stopped spiraling. It settled, like sediment, dropping to the bottom of a river. I began speaking in small ways, answering honestly during evaluations, admitting to nightmares, telling the chaplain I needed more time, letting myself feel the weight instead of drowning beneath it. The confession had cracked something open, not redemption, not forgiveness, but clarity, a kind of moral gravity pulling me toward the truth. And the truth was simple. I could not stay in the program, not after her. I submitted a request for reassignment, not a dramatic resignation, not an act of rebellion, just a quiet acknowledgement that I was no longer fit to be the mechanism I had been. The request surprised command. They assumed burnout. They assumed stress. They never assumed love or obsession or guilt. And I didn't correct them, because this wasn't their confession. It was mine. The last night I listened to her recording, I did something I'd never done. I let the loop finish. Then I deleted the file. Not all at once. My hands shook too hard for that. But I pressed the key, confirmed the erase, watched the system swallow the 8 minutes I had stolen. When it was gone, I sat in the dark, breathing slowly. For the first time since the strike, I felt a quiet inside me that wasn't suffocating, not healing, not peace, just quiet. A place where something new, not redemption, not forgiveness, could someday grow. The confession had ended. Now came whatever waited on the other side. Leaving the program wasn't a dramatic moment. There were no slammed doors, no speeches, no righteous declarations about the morality of war. Just paperwork, signatures, a handshake from someone who barely knew my name. The last time I walked out of the operations building, the sky was still dark. The desert wind carried the smell of dust and distant fuel. A thin strip of dawn hovered on the horizon, pale and hesitant, like it wasn't sure whether morning was deserved. My boots crunched on gravel. I didn't look back. I expected the weight in my chest to lift. It didn't. Guilt doesn't evaporate when you change direction. It follows, but more quietly now, like a shadow walking a few steps behind instead of clinging to your throat. I drove without thinking, past the fences, past the road signs, past the endless stretch of scrubland that always felt like neutral ground, too empty to accuse me, too wide to comfort me. About an hour north of the base, there's a lookout point most people ignore. A jagged cluster of rocks, a drop-off into miles of desert. You can see everything from up there, or nothing. Depends on what you bring with you. I parked the car, walked to the edge, sat down. For the first time in months, I let myself breathe without bracing. The silence was different here. Not mechanical, not digital. A natural quiet. The kind that wraps around you instead of pressing against you. I closed my eyes. I didn't try to replay her voice. I didn't reach for memory like a wound. I just sat there, letting the wind comb through the static inside my skull. I thought about the first night I heard her, the softness, the shimmer of her breath, how I'd leaned toward the sound like it was a lifeline. I thought about the moment her voice disappeared, the way my hands had gone still, the way my world had shrunk into a single, unfinished note. And then I thought about everything after. The collapse, the loop, the confession, the deletion. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't absolution. It was a slow return to myself, or at least to whoever was left. The sun crept higher, painting the rocks gold. The wind warmed. Birds flickered across the horizon in thin, dark strokes. I sat there until my legs ached, until my throat felt open enough to speak. And then, quietly, not to her, not to God, not to the desert, but to the part of me that had survived, I said, "You can stop now." 3 simple words, not forgiveness, not release, just permission. Permission to stop replaying the moment. Permission to stop punishing myself exactly the same way every night. Permission to let the guilt live without steering every breath I took. The wind carried the words away. The desert didn't answer. It didn't need to. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I drove until the highway turned into small towns, and the small towns turned into smaller ones. I stopped for coffee at a gas station that smelled like hot rubber and stale popcorn. The woman behind the counter asked if I wanted a receipt. I shook my head. No, thank you. The simplicity of the moment hit me with unexpected force. A human exchange not tied to surveillance, orders, or consequences. Just 2 people acknowledging each other's existence.
I held on to that. When I finally returned to my apartment, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat on the floor, leaning against the couch, letting the dark feel like dark instead of a hiding place. I didn't play any recordings, didn't search for remnants of her voice in my mind. I let the silence be silent. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time felt fluid, and then I whispered something I hadn't dared before. Thank you. Not for the song, not for the illusion she gave me, not for the moments I stole, but for the reminder that I was still capable of feeling anything at all, even if the cost had been unbearable. Especially because the cost had been unbearable. Her voice had shown me a part of myself that duty had buried, a part that recognized beauty, fragility, and human life with an ache instead of an equation. I didn't deserve redemption for that. I didn't need to. I only needed to remember. Weeks later, after the paperwork was processed and the base issued my clearance downgrade, I packed my things. Not to run, not to escape, just to begin again somewhere quieter. Before leaving, I returned once more to the lookout point. The wind lighter this time, the sky bluer. I stood at the edge and breathed deeply. No song, no static, just wind and stone. I closed my eyes and pictured her. Not the outline from the drone feed, not the rubble, not the final moment. Just her voice, alive, whole, mid-verse. This time, I didn't wait for the note to finish. Some endings aren't meant to be completed. I opened my eyes, turned away from the cliff, and walked back toward the car, toward the road, toward whatever life waited for me next. Not forgiven, not redeemed, but honest. For the first time in a long time, that was enough.